One of the subjects that I am passionate about, and a primary reason that I decided to start this channel, is that of information discernment and assimilation. We currently exist in a world where our access to what could be considered as information is unprecedented. Whatever interest or concern you have, you can find validation sources readily. This allows us the ability to create reinforcement structures surrounding our ideas that give them the appearance of strength and validity effortlessly. However, because we are so inundated, because we have become such voracious consumers of media as information, we have become less discerning. We take our sources for granted as trustworthy and have started to create schematics of reality with limited or unreliable information. And so many of us seem unaware of the risks. In an effort to highlight this, I'd like to utilize a recent example, and that's what brings us here. We need to talk about Jordan Peterson. Hi everybody, I am Shannon. If you are new here, welcome to the channel, and if you're returning, welcome back. As I mentioned in our introduction, one of my passions is highlighting the processes involved with information discernment and assimilation. Before we begin delving into our example, I'd like to take a minute to elucidate what I mean by those terms. We have a plethora of information available at our fingertips today. In fact, we're cognitively inundated with it. Because of how humans operate, we tend towards sources that reinforce our perceptions. And because we have so many sources presenting us with information, that's an effortless path to take. It is of paramount importance that we start asking ourselves questions about how we select the information sources that we consume, which is discernment, and how consuming that information source relates to our perceptions of the reality that is surrounding us, which is assimilation. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I consistently implore you all to be advocates for your own understanding. Validate the things that I or anybody else says. Don't form your perceptions on a subject based solely on the things that you hear me or anyone else saying about that subject. Check the sources. Make sure that there are sources. Anyone can be wrong when they are presenting information, and in many cases, the framework being utilized to present the information is skewed, nefarious, or fallacious. But how do we do that? And where do we sometimes inadvertently fail? Well, that brings us to our current example. Just a few days ago, Jordan Peterson tweeted out an article including two pictures. The tweet was chiding a decision made by a British Columbia human rights tribunal fining a man named Bill Whatcott $55,000 for his actions surrounding the political campaign of Morgane Oger, who is an openly trans female. This tweet read, "And if Whatcott refuses to or cannot pay, then a move from tribunal to standard court proceedings and potentially more severe penalties, as I noted when I objected to Bill C-16. I don't care what you think of Whatcott. This sets a very bad precedent." The article linked in the description was written for a website called LifeSite. That makes no allusions to being anything other than a source that interprets news events in order to present them from a Christian perspective. Jordan went on to subsequently retweet his original tweet with the addition of this commentary. "Is this discriminatory? Every strand of Morgane Oger's DNA contains XY chromosomes, so Oger may be female, but all her bodily cells are male." Leaving aside the pedantic observations surrounding the fact that chromosomes contain DNA and not the other way around, let's further contextualize this tweet because it really matters. Jordan Peterson rose to public awareness in early 2016 because of his opposition to Bill C-16, which was a proposed federal amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act. Bill C-16 did three things. It added the words gender and identity expression into the existing Human Rights Code, alongside such classifications as race and religion, as being protected from employment and housing discrimination, for example. It also added gender identity and expression in two places in the Criminal Code. Section 318.4 of the Code, which defines an identifiable group for the purposes of preventing advocating for genocide and public incitement of hatred, and Section 718.2 A and I of the Criminal Code dealing with sentencing for hate crimes, which stipulates that a court can take into account if a crime that already falls under the existing code is motivated by prejudice into their deliberations if the person is found guilty of the crime. Again, this was pre-existing legislation that already included race, religion, etc., that were simply being expanded in their purview to include gender identity and expression as well. Logicked and Paulogia did fantastic breakdowns that I've included in the description box, so please have a look. I've also included a link to the actual amendment itself. Jordan strongly voices his concern that the amendment will compel individuals to utilize gender pronouns that they do not wish to when addressing or speaking about trans individuals, otherwise, they would face persecution under the law. As such, this would be a form of compelled speech that has been legislated by the government. Bill C-16 did, in fact, not do that at all. The laws already existed for years with regard to race and religion, etc. Adding gender identity and expression did not change their wording. It only expanded their existing purview to protect an additional group. But I digress. Now, I bring this all up because it contextualizes Jordan's public message surrounding this bill, which passed in May of 2016. So let's analyze the message that the current tweets send and what they built upon prior to drilling down their efficacy. It's clearly apparent that the Whatcott case is being presented by Jordan here as validation that he was in fact correct. His prophecy has come to pass. A man is clearly being unfairly persecuted and punished by the government for simply misgendering a trans woman. But is that the case? The article that Jordan linked in his tweet misgenders the claimant Morgane Oger entirely throughout, as well as in the title of the article. So it's a little bit odd that this Canadian publication is not being shut down as well, if that's the case. So let's have a look at a couple of communication tactics that are unfortunately effective that I think might be being utilized here. In order to bolster Jordan's position, he presents partial but moderately accurate information. The information that he is transmitting is not overtly false. He states that a man was fined $55,000 for misgendering a trans woman. In some respects, this is the case, but I will elaborate on that part shortly. He subsequently proposes a scenario where something that would be considered a biological fact, again, ignoring the inversion of DNA and chromosomes, is framed as though it would be considered as similarly actionable from a legal perspective, given the context. His tweet was also accompanied by an overtly and unapologetically biased article from a Christian outlet that frames the situation regarding this specific case as persecution of a Christian man for simply stating their views on transgender people publicly, and potential persecution of Christians in general for simply holding or articulating those beliefs. This sets the context of his framework for information transmission. He was right to be worried, and you should be too. What he foresaw is now taking place. The implication he is transmitting is that those who even deign to profess scientific facts or express religious views regarding biological sex as it pertains to gender are now at risk of persecution and litigation for just articulating an unpopular opinion. Free speech itself is at risk if this scenario is true. And if that's the case, we should all be worried. But there are pieces missing in this narrative, really important pieces. Pieces that people who construct narratives and cultivate followings, who trust their ability to transmit accurate information to them, rely upon you not investigating if you want to believe that what they're transmitting is true. So let's contextualize further. Let's do something imperative, something that everybody should do when they endeavor to formulate an informed opinion on any topic. Let's research this event so that our perspective is based on what we can affirm to be the case and not what somebody else chooses to transmit to us about it. I understand that in this instance, I myself am transmitting information to you. I don't deny that I have biases that may reflect in the presentation of the preceding information. So please, again, advocate for your own understanding. Use the links that I've provided in the description to validate what I say and delve even further. If we want to progress and speak to topics from an informed perspective, the first and most important thing we need is to be armed with the information itself, not simply somebody's opinion on what that information may indicate. So, here are the events as we know them. Morgane Oger is a trans woman who was running in the British Columbia general election in 2017 as a candidate for Vancouver False Creek's riding as an NDP candidate. Morgane, if elected, would have been the first openly transgender woman to be successful in Canada in this endeavor. And Morgane was gaining support and popularity against an incredibly popular Liberal candidate. In another and completely different riding, one where Morgane was not a candidate at all, Bill Whatcott, a devout and vocal Christian, was displeased with his candidate options but still wanted to be involved in affecting the outcome of the election. Bill prayed to God and had a revelation that he could best serve God's desires by targeting Morgane's campaign specifically in a riding that wasn't even his own. So Bill took to his blog, asking for donations in order to print off a flyer that was to be distributed manually and via the internet in Morgane's riding directly to her potential constituents, calling for people to not vote for Morgane. Bill received the requested donation, and in order to enact his plan, he got to work distributing the flyers. Bill traveled from his home location to Morgane's riding just to distribute the flyers, and I'm about to display it on screen. This flyer contains reprehensible speech, but in order to understand what has taken place here and fully contextualize the situation, please bear with me because it's important that I show it. The link to the flyer is also in the description below for your reference. In the flyer that you are viewing, which Bill distributed extensively in a writing that was not even his own, for the sole purpose of directly instructing people of that writing not to vote for Morgane, specifically because Morgane was born biologically male and now identifies as female. Bill refers to Morgane as a transvestite, only uses her previous dead name, purposefully misgenders her, refers to her as morally corrupt, and states that she is pretending to be a woman while utilizing his biblical perspective as justification for transmitting his views. At this juncture, what I have presented are inarguable facts, but what was Bill Whatcott being held accountable for by a human rights tribunal? What statute was violated that constituted an infringement on Morgane's human rights? And why was he ultimately fined $55,000? In order to ascertain this, I did something crazy. I read the ruling, a link to which can also be found in the video description. How Mr. Whatcott conducted himself prior to, during, and in public appearances outside of the deliberation regarding his actions were all of importance here, so let's have a look. Bill Whatcott had a complaint filed against him with the Human Rights Tribunal, not for misgendering Morgane Oger, but rather for infringement of Section 7 of the Human Rights Code. Section 7 of the code indicates that no person may distribute a publication with the intention of propagating or encouraging discrimination against an individual based on their group or class in a fashion that is likely to have a detrimental effect on their life, livelihood, or in a manner that would expose that person to undue hatred or contempt simply due to their group or class membership. This section of the code applies as equally to race and religion, for example, as it does to gender expression and sexual orientation. In subsection 2 of this part of the code, under the same stipulation, it very clearly indicates that this does not hold true for personal correspondence or communications. Essentially, an individual's right to hold and express any opinion on a group is entirely protected right up until the point that that opinion is weaponized into a targeted harassment campaign levied against that individual solely due to their group or class membership and utilized in an attempt to directly affect their lives for that reason. So let's take a minute to revisit and summarize the facts. Bill was not a member of Morgane's potential riding. He raised funds in order to create inflammatory flyers that did not address her campaign platform at all, but instead attacked her for simply being a member of the trans community. And he then traveled to her riding to distribute these flyers to her potential constituents, which had a call to action, directly influencing people not to vote for Morgane just because she was trans. This is an act of targeted discrimination in an attempt to have a negative effect on an individual solely because of who they are. If the words transgender in this flyer were replaced with the words Christian, and in this instance, the rhetoric in the flyer discouraged people from voting for Morgane for that reason, if the language used was equally as dismissive and hateful due to that group affiliation and all other facts remain the same, the case brought in front of the tribunal would have had equal validity under the law. And Bill would have been equally as guilty of a direct violation of the Code of Human Rights. So it's clear at this point that Bill was in violation of the Code of Human Rights. However, you are not criminally liable in these cases. You have no threat of jail time and you incur no record. What the tribunal is capable of doing is levying damages that act as a deterrent to these forms of targeted harassment and or compelling employers, landlords, etc., to enact policies that counteract discriminatory practices. So why exactly is it that Bill specifically had such a large fine? Well, there's a multitude of reasons. Bill held up the proceedings. He wore a t-shirt to each of the hearings that had Morgane's face on the front with the words Mr. Oger. No matter how you use the state to silence your critics, you're still a guy. That was written on the front, and there was a Bible verse written on the back. He consistently attempted to introduce evidence that was not relevant to the proceedings at all in an endeavor just to prove that it's not even possible to be transgendered. He went on to public podcasts and spoke to publications, continuing his inflammatory rhetoric and referring to the tribunal as a kangaroo court. He refused to speak to, of, or address Morgane in her name, but instead referred to her as Ronan, which is her dead name. He was dismissive, disruptive, and rude during the entire process. He went on to waste more of the tribunal's time and money by subsequently filing a complaint against the tribunal, stating that their choice to refer to Ms. Oger by female pronouns was a show of bias on their part because it indicates that they recognize that trans people are deserving of being referenced as the gender that they identify with. Imagine, he was given the option to refer to Ms. Oger as the complainant instead as a compromise, but he refused to do so because it did not align with his beliefs to refer to her as anything but he or Ronan, and he frequently disrupted the tribunal hearings in order to make that point. Bill then proceeded to post public pictures throughout the entire hearing on his Facebook page, including pictures from within the tribunal hearing room, including the participants, which directly violated the privacy and media policy that was clearly set out by the tribunal and all Canadian courtrooms. He directly violated the stipulations surrounding conduct, utilized the opportunity to further discriminate, and took advantage of the attention he was afforded, directly furthering the agenda that brought him there to begin with. All of this factored into the award decision. Bill intended to target and affect Ms. Morgane's life and career simply because of who she was. And when she utilized the only avenue that was available to her via the Human Rights Tribunal to prevent and discourage these forms of targeted discrimination and harassment, Bill doubled down. It also merits mentioning that Morgane ultimately lost her riding by just 400 votes. Had Bill not purposefully targeted Morgane just for being transgendered, she may well have been the first transgendered candidate to win their riding in Canada. But we can never know. So now let's take an opportunity to contrast the message we received earlier in Jordan's tweet and in all of his public dialogues regarding this issue against the facts in their accurate context. Can you honestly say that what Bill was being held accountable for was mere misgendering of a trans person? Was Bill simply stating the scientific fact that biologically born males have XY chromosomes? Is Bill being persecuted simply because his Christian beliefs prevent him from accepting that someone can transition into a gender to which they weren't born? But what might you have thought had I not presented this in its full context? Jordan Peterson is a doctor and he's a public speaker and he is a competent communicator. He's clever enough not to make direct statements. Instead, he relies on the overall construction of the narrative that he's built and cultivated to make those implications for him. In order to do that, you cannot outright lie. There needs to be enough truth in what you're transmitting to support what you're implying, but also enough generality so that you have the ability to deny that you're even making the implication. The rest lay in the presentation of that information from other sources. That way you can usurp your responsibility for directly stating it or propagating it, and a reliance on the fact that people will trust the context that you have set that information in when you're presenting it to them. If no one goes through the hard work of validating the efficacy of what you say, and you can be vague enough to make general implications of your intentions without being accountable for their explicitly being stated, you achieve the goal of persuasion while never having the obligation of being accountable for doing it yourself. And this, my friends, is why sourcing the claims that inform your perspectives is so important. When we allow others to contextualize for us, we take for granted their intentions align with our own and that their information is being transmitted in the appropriate context. We no longer have that liberty. The inundation of opinion as fact and even entertainment as information can be overwhelming. And now our strategies have to change. Now, please don't mistake me. I have my own biases. I'm aware of that. I believe that the tribunal worked in this instance. I believe that if the laws did what Jordan states they do, the very article that he tweeted and a million more would all be subject to their rulings, and yet none are. Because the stipulation in the law protected freedom of expression unless and until it becomes targeted discrimination with clear malice that has a direct effect on their lives simply because of who they are. I am glad that the trans community now has the same avenues for protection that the religious and people of all races and biological sex already had. What I am hoping will differentiate me for you and make you listen to me in this situation is this. I am imploring you, find the sources for the things that I say. Look at the information surrounding this directly. Do not, under any circumstances, just believe me or my intentions. Advocate for your own understanding and find out what's true. The context and the minutia matter. And if you don't believe me, please go look for yourself. I have all of the links in the description. And if you take anything from me today, please just let it be this. The next time that you're forming an opinion on anything, ask yourself, am I basing this on what I can know and can confirm, or what I've seen and what I've heard about this topic? And if your answer is even uncertain, please go look. What you think and what you believe is too important just to leave the chance. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. And as always, a massive, massive thank you to my patrons. You guys are a massive help to me in supporting and growing the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, the Patreon and PayPal links are both in the descriptions. There's also Discord links in the description, as well as links to all of my social media. Please go through all of the links that I provided, as well as sources. And if you're new here, please subscribe, or at the very least, please let me know what you think in the comments down below. And as always, help elevate the discourse.